Good evening, everybody. I'm Rod Solomons. I am the mayoral candidate for the Credible Alternative First Movement, as I said. As you know, we are contesting elections in Cape Town. We are giving citizens of Cape Town an alternative offering to what they are being presented by the political parties. And we always said that this election campaign, we're going to run it not the traditional way. We are going to use technology. We're going to use multimedia platforms. And we're going to use social media. And one of the platforms that we decided to use was the Zoom platform. And tonight is a start of the usage of the Zoom platform. And we're starting with one of the most important topics or issues that are facing people of Cape Town. People have been asking about it and asking what's our position on it. So we've launched our manifesto, and we indicated in our manifesto that we would be having various policy positions or more detailed positions on various matters. And one of those matters is housing and spatial planning. And as I said, is one of the most important issues facing Cape Townians. And tonight I am honored to introduce a session, and having with us the person leading that discussion will be our spokesperson. He's been with me when we started the South Africa First Forum. He's also the secretary of it and the secretary of the CA First Forum. His name is Sean Lewis. Sean is also a candidate, and he's going to deal with this vexing issue around the housing problem in Cape Town. But it's our considered belief and our considered position that putting a roof over someone's house is not the only solution. The key is that people must live in dignity. And Sean is going to share with you what will be our approach. And then you are welcome to ask us any questions either tonight or at a later stage. It is now my privilege to hand over to Sean, who has been the person who has been the key drafter of our policy position on housing and spatial planning. Sean Lewis, over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Rod. Okay, so one of the challenges, and I mean, we see it every day. Every day when we drive on our roads, when we drive the leafy suburbs out of the city itself, we see the problem of inadequate housing. We see it in the city with people being homeless. Probably the biggest challenge facing South Africa today and facing the city of Cape Town is the fact that we don't have enough houses for the people of this country and the people of this city. Now, and that's become one of the most topical issues in this election today. So people often talk about housing and undoing apartheid spatial planning. But then what does that mean really? So when we talk about apartheid, we tend to talk about things like discrimination, oppression, exploitation, repression, you know, all of those big words. And apartheid was all of that. But one of the things that we don't necessarily talk about when we talk about apartheid is the whole notion of reservation and the idea of reserving stuff for some people. And one of the things, I mean, the keystone of apartheid was about reserving the right to a quality of life, to a fantastic quality of life, to only white people. That's the key, that's a cornerstone of apartheid, reserving the right to the quality of life to only white people. And to do that, they had to move, they did a number of things. Amongst them was, and apartheid spatial planning was informed by that concept, that they wanted to reserve the right to a quality of life to only white people. So they moved Black people, that generic Black people, they moved us out, all of us out from the places where you can work. right? They moved us out from the places of the best places for recreation. In Cape Town, we're talking about the city of Cape Town, we're talking about Bellville, we're talking about all of those industrial nodes, all of those urban nodes. We were moved out from there. We were moved away from the mountain. We were moved away from the ocean because they wanted to reserve those places for themselves. And then they decided that they're going to make those places that they've reserved world-class so that anybody in the world might want to come there. But they didn't think about doing exactly the same for those Black people that they'd moved out of those places that they've reserved. So they made, and what happened is that they started creating inferior services to all of those areas. So at best, we got inferior services. At worst, we got no services at all. So, and that was apartheid, right? The challenge though today is that reality has not been unbundled, has not been undone. What we have instead is we have some leakage of Black people into those white areas, those formerly white areas. And so now that those formerly white areas are no longer completely white. So it's no longer only white people who live in close to the cities, close to the places of work, close to the places for best recreation, closest to the places with the best roads, closest to the places with the best services and sewage and water and electricity. It's no longer just white people. There are Black people living amongst those, but what now divides those people is class. The reality today is that the people with money are able to live close to those that are entitled to a quality of life that is world-class. And the people that have less and less money are being relegated further and further away from world-class. So apartheid apartheid still exists, but it's no longer defined necessarily by race, even though white people still form predominantly that privileged class with a fantastic quality of life, and Black people still predominantly form that unprivileged class with inferior and more inferior qualities of life. So when we talk about undoing the legacy of apartheid spatial planning, we need to think about what is it that we then need to do. So of course, one thing is that we need to build more houses. Absolutely. So the city needs to build more houses. The city needs to be conscious of the fact that the reality that we have now with people, with homeless people, is not a reality that's going to be static. It's going to grow because more and more people are moving into the cities. It's a global phenomenon. So the city needs to plan for more and more people moving into the cities. So we need to build more houses. But over and above that, we also need to say, where have we moved all of those Black people? And we need to now find ways to take the work that we have, those work opportunities, to those areas where Black people live, because you can't take all the people of Mitchell's Plain and all the people of Khayelitsha and all the people of Delft and all the people of all of those townships, all those communities outside of the city, where those wastelands. Can't take all of those people and bring them people into the city, move them into Claremont, move them into Bellville. So we're going to have to find, as a city, we have to find ways to move those opportunities for work into those areas so that the quality of life improves. A very simple example of quality of life is when you're living in the city of Cape Town, you can get up in the morning and walk to your office, do your work, and then you walk back and have a lovely leisurely walk, spend 10, 15, 20 minutes. When you're living in Claremont, you'll spend 20 minutes driving to work. When you're living in Mitchell's Plain, you're spending what, an hour and a half in a taxi? That's it, hour and a half in the taxi, in the traffic. You still have to you still have to go and queue to get to the taxi. Now so the quality of life of that person living in Mitchell's Plain is significantly impaired compared to the quality of life of that person living in Claremont or Rondebosch or Pinelands. Let's talk about service. So if we talk about services, and services in Claremont, where we have properties that are 600 to 1,000 meters square, where people live sparsely, you have 3 or 4 people living in a house, and it works if they have garbage collection once a week, because there are not that many people. They don't produce so much garbage. But now let's go to Manenberg, or let's go to Hanover Park, where we have garbage collection, where people live in blocks of flats. Go to Q-Town, where people live in blocks of flats. And they're large families, families of 6, 7, 8 living in a flat. And these flats are on top of each other, 2 stories, 3 stories high. And so they produce a lot of garbage. You cannot, as a city, then say, okay, we're going to treat these areas equally. We'll send a garbage collection once a week to Claremont, and we'll send garbage collection once a week to Hanover Park. Because Hanover Park cannot handle, Hanover Park, the garbage disposal cannot handle all of the garbage that's produced there. Let's not talk about places like the squatter camps, where garbage collection happens even more infrequently, and people live on top of each other. So the reality is that the city, in order to unbundle to undo the legacy of apartheid, the city has to do a host of things. And one of the principles of CA First is the notion of equity. Equity is not equality. Equity is not saying, if I'm going to send garbage trucks to Constantia once a week, I must also send garbage trucks to Khayelitsha once a week. That is not equity. Equity is about saying, what does Khayelitsha need and what does Constantia need? And let's meet the needs of both Khayelitsha and Constantia in terms of garbage collection, in terms of providing water, in terms of fixing their roads or providing roads. Let's fix, and equity is about saying, how do I redress the legacy of apartheid? Our challenge now, and it's very easy to point fingers at the DA and say that for the last 15 years, the DA has been governing the city, and the DA hasn't done anything to really effectively address the legacy of apartheid. And it's true, the DA hasn't. But go even further back, before the DA took over the city, and we find that the ANC did as little. In fact, the ANC took the legacy of apartheid, inherited it, and perpetuated it, and the DA continues to perpetuate that legacy of apartheid. The most powerful weapon for a municipality is the budget. The most powerful weapon to use in order to address that legacy of apartheid is the budget, the way that the municipality manages its money. It's about saying, how do I collect money, and how do I spend money in order to address the legacy of apartheid? And we as CA First do not believe that any of the governments that we've had in the last 27 years in this city have effectively asked that question and effectively addressed that question. We've seen brilliant ideas come up from various people at different times, but we've seen very little implementation of those brilliant ideas. The city has a wonderful municipal spatial development framework that takes all of these various factors into consideration. They brought in a lot of clever people, town planners, engineers, urban designers, to think about this and construct this wonderful municipal spatial development framework. But then look at what part of it have they implemented? How have they changed the lives of people that were victimized and brutalized by apartheid, completely dispossessed and denied the quality of life that the privileged have? How have they changed that? And the answer today is not at all. The divide between rich and poor is greater now than it was at the end of apartheid. So our municipal government has failed to address this, and we need a fresh look. We need a new perspective on things, and a perspective that is informed by redress of the inequities of the past, and a perspective that is informed by equity to communities based on what they need and what they deserve, as opposed to what officials are willing to deliver, to give. And maybe I should stop there so that I don't, because I could go on.
Sean, Rod here. Sean, you know, the one question that people, let me start my video. They're asking me to start my video. Sean, you know, the one question that people are asking is, it's good and well you guys are saying that what are you guys going to do about the people that are currently living on the outskirts? The people that are living far from the city and so on. And linked to that is, what is our approach to the city using unused land that is available? What would your responses be to that?
So, yeah, that's actually quite a complex question that you're asking me. So let's start with the first part. The people living in far away from the cities and whatever, right? So one of the challenges, the big challenge for a city like this is to encourage economic development so that you can actually bring work closer to people. So a big challenge, because the whole notion of a spatial framework and of spatial planning is about planning around communities. So when you start planning around communities and the needs of communities, you need to say, what does this community need in order to thrive, to survive and to thrive? And the reality is that the communities that we are talking about, those far-flung communities, do not have what they need in order to survive and thrive. So they have to travel. So they have to commute. They have to commute from outside the places of work to inside the places of work. So one of the things that we need to change, and we need to talk to a lot of clever people. I don't have a glib answer. I don't have a magic formula, a wand that I can wave. But what we do need to do is to say, how do we actually create economic opportunities, encourage entrepreneurism in those communities where people live so that people can be employed closer to where they live? So that's one part of it. The other part of it is, how do we ensure that people can move from those places where they live effectively to the places where work is and where recreation is, which means that we have to address the transport system. So when we're talking about housing, we're not just talking about housing in isolation of anything else. We're talking about housing in relation to economic opportunities and entrepreneurism. We're talking about housing in relation to transport. We're talking about housing in relation to the provision of services, of water, of electricity, of sewage. So housing is not a thing on its own. It is part of an integrated development. And what has happened with apartheid spatial planning is that they said, let's build houses for those people, build a bunch of houses and put them there, create dormitory towns. People sleep there, but they don't live there. They have to go and live and work in the cities. So that's all one part of the question. What was that second part of your question again, Rod?
What would unused land? What do you think? What would our approach be to, if we in charge of the city, to unused land?
Absolutely. So there are lots of unused land. In my opinion, and it's in my opinion, and I'm hoping that it's an opinion that makes sense. The city has had a tendency to sell off land. The city has had there's been lots of unused land. So let's just talk about city land, because there are other pieces of land as well. Yeah. The city has a tendency to sell off unused land and to sell them off to developers. They auction it off to developers. They go say, okay, we have a piece of land, we need developers, and the developers come in and bid for that land. But now those developers come in and bid for that land, and they buy the land in order to develop them. But in order for them to develop that land, they have to build houses, and industry and stuff that the middle class can afford, that rich people can afford, that the middle class can afford. Effectively, they are building. So the city, with its current strategy of selling off land assets, effectively is only encouraging the development of housing for middle-class people, for wealthy people, for people that can afford to buy houses today. Poor people that are on the housing waiting list and have been on that housing waiting list for 20, 30 years cannot afford the houses that those developers build. So what needs to happen is that the city needs to change its mindset and say, how do we use this land in order to provide housing for people that cannot typically afford to buy houses in the most expensive part of this country. And the way to do that would be to expand the rental housing stock. The city currently has a plan to sell off its rental housing stock, which is absolutely insane. because the people who live in that rental housing stock are the poor people. Now the city goes and they sell off those 3,000 or whatever the rental houses, and somebody goes off and buys it. The moment they buy it, if we look at what has happened in the past with RDP houses, the poor people who buy the houses sell them to people with money. And then you end up with one person owning hundreds of houses, one wealthy person owning hundreds of houses and creaming off the rental income, which the city could have been getting, and the city could have then used that rental income to continue to develop. So my gut feel is that one of the things that we should be looking at is increasing the housing stock through rental income and using vacant land for that purpose, and not giving it off to developers to build for wealthy people. So so that's a long answer, sorry.
John, can I follow up on that? You know, the other day when I went to go and do the interview in East River, and I went to go and hand out some flyers in some letterboxes. I drove past I think Peniel or something is somewhere there. I think that's a area or something. And I was amazed to see that in the past, there were trees and all of that stuff, and suddenly I saw all of this flats going up there. And clearly it is one of those developments that you are talking about, that more well-off people can afford, etc. But the question that then comes up is, that land, if the city had to build those things, it would have been taken them years and years to build those flats and so on. What would be our thinking around the fact that developers, when land gets sold to them to do developments for profit, they're able to build these houses so quickly or these apartments so quickly? But when these apartments need to be built for poorer people or less well-off, let's use the word poorer and lower middle class people, including the people in the vexing question, which is in District 6. You don't need to address a District 6 question, but I'm using that example, is that why are they able to do it so quickly and within budget and so on? But if the city is involved in such a thing, it gets over budget, it gets dragged, and so on. What do you think? What would be our solution to try and address that vexing question?
Look, okay. Once again, this is my gut feel. My gut feel is that there are probably two problems, maybe three. There were three problems that prevents us from building houses quickly and from developing quickly. The one is competence. I think we have a large number. I think we've got a sad reality of politicians interfering with interfering and not understanding where the line needs to be drawn between making political decisions and articulating a vision, and allowing technical experts to execute. So you have and then the city doesn't necessarily hire the best technical experts. So a city like Cape Town, where you have an executive mayor and that mayoral committees that get involved in the operation of the city, and the politicians that get involved in the operation of the city don't then encourage and they employ people that are good at saying yes and cover their arse, but are not necessarily prepared. They're not necessarily equipped or brave enough to go out and do their job their technical job properly. So that's one part. One part for me is competence. But that's probably the nicest part. Another part is the whole notion of corruption. I mean, the reality is that people create sweetheart deals. They make sweetheart deals with family and friends and whatever in order to channel money that we pay to the city and that we get from the national government that we pay to government through our taxes, and they channel that money to family and friends. So we've got corruption as a problem. And then of course we don't incentivize. We've got this notion of screwing over the service providers, that the honest service providers. So for me, the right way to do this is to be able to firstly separate politics from execution, have a very clear understanding that politics is about long-term planning, it's about vision, it's about strategy, etc. And execution is about execution. And then to get the best technical people to actually contract in the right service providers to build. Because if I build a house, I know I'll go and look for a builder that is competent. I'm not sure that the city looks for builders that are competent. I'm sure that the city looks for, if they tie themselves up in so much red tape that they don't find what is competent, but they find something that is a nice, neat bundle that fits into their red tape. So I think those are some of the things that must be changed in order to improve service delivery.
Thanks, Sean. I think that goes to the nub, and I'm sure, I think in one of our sessions we're going to deal with how we plan to reposition the city and re-engineer it, do business differently. I'm sure we'll be alerted to further questions that are people posing on Facebook as well, and you're welcome to, in the chat group, to pose questions, or I don't know if our administrators tell us whether people can raise their hands and pose questions. But Sean, I want to ask you, the other issue that comes up, that is a code. It's a code for something else. And let me pose it to you. Is a question, the thing that people say that, but people are migrating to Cape Town from other parts of South Africa and etc. And it makes it difficult for us now as a city or as a provincial government, but let's talk about the city, to provide the kind of decent housing and the kind of proper spatial development and planning for ordinary Cape Townians, which are predominantly poor and lower middle class. What would be our response to that, and how would we, if we in charge of the administration, look at that phenomenon?
Okay, so before I actually directly answer your question, maybe let me just mention that there was a former premier of the Western Cape who described those people moving to the city as refugees.
Yeah.
And it was obviously a completely horrible and abhorrent description of the people, because and just opens up an entire can of worms, because and let me not go there other than to say that was completely abhorrent, because the nature of, and it completely ahistorical, more than okay, so let me be a little bit more objective. It was completely ahistorical. By ahistorical, I mean it completely ignores the realities of history, that the population of Cape Town and the population of South Africa and most of the world is made up of people moving from one place to another, moving from one place into the city. And you can just look at the city of Cape Town and you can see that the city of Cape Town is made up of people that moved from other places, from a whole host of other places into this place. So just because you moved first or your parents moved here first doesn't give you the right to then look down on other people that are moving here afterwards. There is no such thing. That kind of jingoism and that kind of xenophobia has no place in this modern world and no place in this democratic South Africa. So that's the one part of the answer that I wanted to give. The other part is, how should we see this? We should see this as a city. We should see this migration to the city as completely inevitable. If you look at any social historians and economic historians, and if you look at any of the writings by those people today, you will see that this movement is completely inevitable, and that currently, I might get my numbers wrong, but currently about 48% of our population lives outside of cities in rural areas, and about 52% of our population lives in urban areas. In the next 20 years, that is expected to change quite dramatically, and the rural population will be reduced to about 23%, if I'm not mistaken, and the rest will be in urban areas. This is not just Cape Town. This is the entire planet. Urbanization and the migration to the urban centers is a reality of our day-to-day. It is going to happen now. It's happening, and it's going to continue to happen as time goes by. So a city that a city that ignores that reality, that says, let's build a wall like Donald Trump, let's build a wall around the city and keep the refugees out. That kind of mentality has no place. That is completely historical, doesn't face the economic facts. I see a first in a city council needs to be driving an agenda that says we need a multi-year project. We need a multi-year strategy that says the people will keep coming in, and we need to say, we currently about 4 million people here. If we're going to be 6 million people in 10 years or 20 years time, how do we ensure that 6 million people have houses? How do we ensure that 6 million people have jobs? How do we ensure that 6 million people have adequate services? How do we ensure that the children of 6 million people have schools to go to, and so on and so forth? And unless we're asking those questions and saying, how do we get to that point? And what do we have to do today to ensure that we get to that 6 million? Unless we're asking that question, we're failing as a council. And the problem with our city is that I don't believe we're asking that question aggressively and asking that question every single day and saying, what do we do today to make sure we cater for those people for the future?
Sure. Thanks.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no. You did. I want to do a follow-up. A follow-up. That is in terms of thinking through deeply around the dilemma that you're facing. I don't want to call it a problem, but it's a dilemma. And obviously planning and getting a strategy in place to address it. How would we deal with this small-minded politics around the fact that if an idea comes from someone from a different home, political or whatever, to us, for example, around the housing thing, how would we deal with it?
Look, that's an important question. It's actually a very important question. And sadly, it's a question that I don't think is addressed often enough in this country. So in this country, we have political parties that seem to feel that if the idea does not come from inside their ranks, it's a bad idea. So our major political parties will oppose each other at every turn, and because it's not their idea. Now, in order for this country to survive and to thrive, we need perspectives that are different. We need people to look at our problems and our challenges from multiple perspectives and say, how do we address that challenge? And we need to listen to other people. And we have to listen carefully, because we mustn't accept everything that everybody else says. I mean, I think it was today or yesterday, General Constant from the Freedom Front said, maybe we should reconsider this notion of apartheid being a crime against humanity. And yes, sis, now those kind of nonsense we mustn't be listening to. Those kind of nonsense that's an oak that must be punched in the face, to be perfectly honest. But,
I don't like tweeting, but I made a tweet about that this morning.
Yeah, I generally don't single out people. I don't want to attack other parties, but yes, that one is attack. But there are some very good ideas that come out from other parties. There are some excellent ideas that come from other parties. For example, For example, the Good Party talks about the golf courses. And I think it's an excellent idea. We have quite a lot of golf courses in in Cape Town. And I know Rod is sighing here because golf is his thing. But golf,
no, I'm not sighing. I'm not sighing.
Golfers by and large have money. Golfers by and large can get into their car and go and play golf in places places outside the city. Houses are needed more in the city than golf courses. And you can take away Mowbray Golf Course and leave Pinelands because they separated from each other by the N2. So there are things that we can do. And that's a good idea. There are some good ideas that come from other people. We need to be able to listen to other people's ideas, and we need to be able to embrace those ideas where they make sense and oppose the ideas that don't make sense. And it doesn't matter where the ideas come from. My feeling.
Sean, just, addressing the housing issue and the spatial planning problem is a multidisciplinary issue and a multi-dimensional issue. Can you tell those who listen to us, what would be our approach to utilizing all the skills and knowledge and expertise that are floating around here in Cape Town to assist us to deal with this vexing problem of housing in a deliberative way?
Well, okay, so organizationally within the municipality, the one thing that we have to break down is this climate of fear of failure. Because what we have in the municipality, the city of Cape Town, is we have executive directors who get paid a hell of a lot of money to serve Cape Town. But their primary focus in their jobs is to cover their arse because they want to make sure that they don't incur the wrath of the politicians or of other executive directors or of the mayor. They don't want to incur anybody's wrath. So they want to retain their jobs. So job preservation and holding on to their jobs is often more important at that most senior level within the city than is the actual development of services and delivery of services to the larger Cape Town communities. So that for me is one problem. And what needs to happen is that climate of fear and of obedience to politicians who pull the strings, of becoming puppets at the highest level. That climate of fear needs to be broken down. And those executive directors need to be tested for their competence in working together so that they start doing things they start working together and solving problems together instead of working in isolation and against each other. And that's one big problem. The second part of that answer is to say, fantastic, we've got experts in the city, but let's also look at the expertise that exists outside the city and look at how we can leverage that expertise in order for us to be able to do the best that we can and to be the best city that we can, not just for some people who live close to amenities, but for the entire city. And that I don't believe we are doing effectively. So those are two things I think we should be driving as CA first.
Okay. Sean, there's a question that's from Facebook, I see. Our thoughts on, but most importantly, how would we try and solve the vexed question about homelessness in the city?
So that's a difficult question, eh?
Yeah.
That's a difficult question. And
so therefore he started by saying, what are our thoughts? But as you know, it is a difficult question, but we were not going to duck to deal with the difficult issues.
No, we won't duck to deal with difficult issues. So, and there are lots of people, there are lots of people in the city already that are doing things about homeless with the homeless. They're not dealing with large numbers of homeless, but they're dealing with homeless and they're dealing with them very effectively. And the ways that they are dealing with homeless people are, they are trying to give them, one, a dignified place to live and a dignified way to earn their living. So, so in terms of, so for me, and if I, based on what I've read and what I've seen, and I'm talking about individuals, the individuals that have been turned around in terms of from homelessness to being employed and in a home, or individuals for whom their dignity as a human being, as a productive human being, has been returned in some way, shape, or form. One of my favorite places one of the places that I really enjoy is, and I love coffee, so I'm a coffeeaholic. And the place where I buy my coffee and this is a bit of a plug, I guess, for the place I buy my coffee, is a cafe called Gangstar Cafe. And what Gangstar Cafe does is they've established a chain of coffee shops, and they take ex-offenders and they train them to be baristas and waiters and to prepare food. And in that way, they get them off the street and give them a and restore their dignity in order to be able to serve the community. Small numbers of people, but that for me is the model of that for me is a model that we need to emulate in the city, because the way to solve, and I know there's lots of homeless people in the city, but the way to solve a big problem like that is to do it in small bits, and the city can emulate that.
Yeah. Sean, that question, by the way, I didn't want to tell you, it might have influenced how you answered. No, I don't think it would have influenced in any case. It came from a very good friend of ours, Joey Fourie. So Joey is following CA First movement, and we hope that Joey is going to encourage many Cape Townians to vote for CA First on 1 November. Sean, we're almost out of time. Before I'm going to allow you some concluding remarks, I don't know if this is a grenade or something that I want to, it's very topical. It happened today and over the last few days. People have been evicted by the city at Steen Villa. It's close to Steenberg train station. I think there's Gap House, I don't know, I think maybe it's Gap Housing or something, but these are apartments. And the city has been evicting people from there over the last few days, today in particular. I think it was in the media as well. How would we approach something like that if we faced with such a dilemma?
Okay, so I'm not sufficiently. I'm not ducking, but I'm not sufficiently aware of the facts to be able to comment in a coherent way about this particular instance. I believe that the city does need to have the capacity to evict when things are done unlawfully. We need to actually have a city that does things lawfully and ensures that the citizens engage in whatever they engage in lawfully. So respect for the law is fundamental to our continued existence and our continued thriving as a city. At the same time, though, I believe that the occupation, and I'm suspecting from the way that you asked the question that this was houses to which that were built by some other people. So occupation of houses, I believe, is in large part a move of desperation, because there just seem to be no options. It just seems to be no light at the end of the tunnel. There's no vision for that people can buy into. I mean, you can go anywhere in this country. Go to places like Easter River or Manenberg, and talk to people that have that, whose names are on the housing waiting list. And you will see and hear a desperation and a hopelessness that this problem will ever be solved, that they're ever going to get a house. So when you force your citizenry to that level of hopelessness, you then force them to take desperate action in order to address that level of hopelessness. So my belief is that the city and its planning and its conversation around complex issues and important issues like housing should be a completely transparent conversation. Know what the housing list is. People should know what the state of the housing list is. People should know what capacity we have to build houses, what capacity we have to accommodate people. And we should be completely open and transparent. And I don't believe that the city is open and transparent. I think that politicians lie. I think that we're running for office now, but I think politicians lie about what they're going to do and when they're going to do it and how they're going to do it. And they leave disappointed people in their wake. And that disappointment, that despair, that hopelessness causes those kind of desperate actions. So I would want to be a city that is transparent, a city that is caring, a city that is humane, but still a city that respects and abides by the law.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Just a good comment from Tony Bogus. I think I know Tony. You should know Tony as well. He's saying he supports the idea of rebalancing, you know, the whole issue of equity, rebalancing services away from the privileged areas to areas where they are more needed. And I think that it's imperative that that happens. So I'm sure we don't need to comment on that. Let me just see if there's any other questions. There's a questions. Maybe I'll ask these two questions and then I'll hand over to you to make some concluding remarks. Gary Gabriels, jy het volleybal gespeel baie jare gelede saam, teen mekaar of whatever. He's asking, how would you create more industrial areas closer to where the bulk of the city of Cape Town residents live? So meaning, you know, the bulk of the citizens live supposedly on the Cape Flats and so on. So how would we create more industrial areas over there? I think that's what Gary's actually asking, because I think the majority of the people live over there. Any thoughts?
I don't have any close thoughts. Incidentally, Gary and I played next to each other and not against each other. But he also gave me these awkward balls to hit, so he's still doing it now in this session. But so I don't have a clear idea as to how to do this. I do know that what we need to do is we need to encourage people. We need to encourage businesses to locate their businesses in areas outside of the city, the main city areas. Now, in order to do that, what do we need to do? Obviously, if they move it into a Philippi or to a Mitchell's Plain or to a Khayelitsha, they'll obviously have the labor close by, right? But then you need to ensure that the business is safe and secure, that there is transport for the business, so there's a whole host of complex infrastructural things that need to be in place in order for that business to thrive in that area. And we need to asking ourselves the questions, what are the things that we need to put in place in order for a business to thrive in whatever area and whatever that business is? And so that in broad strokes would be my answer. It's a very general, and I apologize that it's a general answer rather than a very specific answer. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert on most things.
Sean, the last question that I'm going to pose, because it's 10 to 8, and then I'm going to allow you to make some concluding remarks about our approach to housing and spatial development, is from Feroz Mulaji. And you know, this goes to the nub in terms of what we're about, is how will we reorientate the city from a law enforcement orientation to one which is orientated towards human development?
Look, so my friends ask difficult questions. So one of the challenges around the way that we've organized our policing in this country, around law enforcement in the country, is that we've built these police stations as little army barracks.
Sean, just hang on, just to assist you. Just before we respond, Feroz, we are going to have a session where we're going to share in more detail our approach to safety and security in the city. So I think that is scheduled to happen. So don't be too intimidated, Sean. But continue continue on your answering journey.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so law enforcement in South Africa was designed to protect corridors. So you'll find to protect corridors that of access to the important productive parts of our urban areas. And if you look at it, you'll see that's exactly what has happened. Over time, we've had satellite police stations being established, and those satellite police stations in large part also try and protect corridors. So, and the idea is that you want to keep the productive part, the economic hub of the cities as secure as possible, and basically keep the natives in their place, which was kind of I guess the way that law enforcement was conceived in the past. So we need to rethink that, so that and I don't know exactly what the answer is, because this is again completely out of my comfort zone. So maybe I should stop at this point and defer to Rod and to whoever's going to be dealing with the law question. Sorry.
Yeah. Feroz, thanks, Sean. Feroz, the broad answer to this is that is fundamentally what we want to change. We want to change the city from a krachtdadige, focusing on law enforcement and focusing on being this world-class city to everyone. But in essence, it's a city, two cities in one. Some people say three cities in one. Is that we want to change the city and live in a Cape Town that is humane. And I think Sean mentioned a little bit to some of it. It's a humane city. It's a city that is caring. It cares for its citizens and it cares for its staff, everyone. It's a can-do city. So we try and find solutions to things. And it is an entrepreneurial city where entrepreneurs thrive in this place. And that also allows me to answer. There's another question from Ferran Hudsenberg on our thoughts on relieving youth employment. We're also having a session specifically our approach to employment and entrepreneurship. We're going to deal in more detail. And then we're going to have a session with some of our youth candidates, our younger candidates, and in another session. Sean, you want to make some concluding remarks?
No, not really. So look, okay, maybe a small number of concluding remarks. So I jumped on the CA First bandwagon, and I've been riding the CA First train for a very simple reason. Our political parties, our established political parties, have failed this country terribly. And they failed because they've put the interests of parties, generally put the interests of parties before the interests of the people of this country and of the city. And I strongly believe that we need to be able to challenge the complete control, dominance, hegemony of the established political parties by putting forward alternatives. And those could be independent alternatives, as well as alternatives like ourselves, like CA First, where we've got a bunch of people that are contesting the elections that are not looking to create a political career for themselves, but are looking to be able to contribute to the development of the communities that they come from, that they intend to serve. And I think that is sorely needed in this country, not just at municipal level, but we need to start here. And then we need to look at what do we do in the future to ensure that we create this wave of change that changes the country at municipal level, at provincial level, and at national level. So I would encourage people to look at alternatives and vote for alternatives. And I'm hoping that you vote for the credible first alternative, because I think we've got a bunch of good people here. But in large part, vote for alternatives.
Okay. Thank you, Sean. Just before we conclude, we want to thank everybody who has joined us via Zoom and those who have followed via Facebook. I think this video is going to be uploaded on Facebook and on our YouTube channel and on our website. Then don't forget, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, we'll be dealing, and I'll be dealing with the issue of our approach to corruption, which is very important. Corruption, accountability, and whistleblowing. So join us at 10 a.m. tomorrow. You can either tune in via Facebook, or you can join us on our Zoom. I think it's on the screens now, if I'm not mistaken. So thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. And don't forget, vote CA first on 1 November.